going to get into sort of the buy side. As was mentioned before, we have a couple of comments already from some folks on the buy side. It's been a real challenge, frankly, to get folks from the buy side to fly to Miami. Arguably, partially the reasons I think have to do, please by all means, go right up to, go right behind the curtain there, watch your steps, is, I think, frankly, reflective of the business model of agencies and the price compression, the problems of too much manual labor to do too much increasing work, as we've talked about before. So ironically, in this sort of buy-side conversation that sadly I have to moderate for you guys, is this sort of understanding of what the hell's going on the buy side. Right? And that's not just agencies, but it's also marketers, especially those folks who are in-housing certain opportunities and situations. You got enough over there, you go. How about this one? There you go. It's like a telephone, okay, with Tiffany. No. But it's a real challenge, right? Because the agency business model, right, is supremely compromised. And marketers, right, necessarily who have historically, shall we say, outsourced or depended on their agencies to do these functions, right, are wondering how those processes get done, as the word was open and thrown out there before. There is a desire for more transparency, certainly on the media buying function and the dollars and where they're going, the tech tax, right, as was alluded to before. It's a lot more questioning, a lot more inquisitory conversations, a lot more, just a lot of process that 10, 15 years ago was relatively knee-jerk into, of course our agency will do it, or we'll have agencies bid for our services, versus a lot more complexity, a lot more need by the market. So with that, I want to say hello to all of our three contestants here on this conversation before lunch. I'm going to let each one of them identify themselves and what part of the food chain that they're in. And really, what I'm going to really do is lean on them, not physically, trust me, to get some insights as to what they see and how they're trying to tackle some of the problems and challenges that they're hearing from the quote-unquote buy side, whatever that is, when it comes to making the process of making ad buys much more efficient and or effective based on all these changes that are going on. So we'll start with you and go right down the row.
Hi everyone, and I'm sorry that we're preventing you from going to lunch. Joanne and Miguel, FreeWheel Advertisers, we're part of a larger FreeWheel organization, and I run product strategy for the demand side of the business. So some of you might have heard of Strata. We were formerly known as Strata, and we are home to 1,200 agencies running their media buying business within our platform.
So I can't imagine that you've had any exposure to the problems and challenges of buy side.
No, not at all.
And neither are you, Jessica.
Right. My name is Hindlian, and I work at LiveRamp and head up the TV platforms business there. And if you I like to take a step back and think about what we do as being, it's actually pretty simple. It's really three things. It's our graph, which is the core of our business, and it's something that I think is particularly relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. It's also data, so access to first and third party data in a universal manner, and then it's the connectivity business that we run that sits on top of our graph, and it's those three components that we hope and really want to help bring to the advanced TV ecosystem to help speed and improve some of the pain points that we've been talking about.
Very ideal, and obviously Jay,
yes,
VideoAmp.
Jay from VideoAmp. So we are a software and data company that is helping unify processes and workflows across linear TV and digital advertising. And we do that with a various suite of products. So we have a next generation planning and workflow tool. We create TV viewership audiences from ACR and set-top box data, and then we match that to digital identity. We work with LiveRamp on that. And then we connect buyers and sellers into various different marketplaces, and FreeWheel is one of those. So a bunch of different things happening, but really centralized around how do we actually create a more unified platform approach to TV and video.
Okay, so let's start with the comment that Kevin just said from Canvas just a second ago, right? The idea of automating various functions on the buy side is essentially, I forget what the word was, but sort of mythical, I guess, would be sort of the word that I would sort of gravitate towards. A lot of program manualness, right? Still, maybe more on the latter side of that word versus the earlier side of that word. Let me just start with sort of a basic principle, right? Does anybody on the buy side, again, feel free to be as liberal as possible in that definition, whether it be the brand marketers and or the agencies. Does anybody want this automation, or do they just want to be able to do what they do better without interruption and feel that they can kind of, continue to kind of incrementally improve their own processes just faster on their own, right? Do they want to be disrupted and reinvented?
I can speak to maybe the holding company approach. Joanne, you could probably speak to some of the more distributed agencies, but it very much depends on where every holding company is in their sort of strategic understanding of where their future is, right? So, one of our key partners is Omnicom, and they have created a unified framework that takes silos away from investment planning and research. That means that TV and video is treated equally. So they're not doing separate processes, and that starts with the upfronts. And they've reorganized the agency around that, and so there's this internal agency now called Omni, which serves all of the other media agencies within Omnicom across the country. They've employed change management with outside consultants and us to really understand how many hours per year are spent on each function in the planning, buying, posting process, how many meetings are held, how many people are in these meetings. It's gotten to that level. So from their perspective, they're using software not just as incremental, but they plan to reorient how the entire agency runs on this. And then taking, for example, the model of really having data-driven approaches to things like the charts and science is doing, and have that percolate throughout the rest of the holding company. Other holding companies are doing it more incremental. They're doing it with one agency, like Essence within WPP, newer agency acquired in, very much a programmatically driven at its roots, and they're kind of an experimental test bed to see what can work, try things out. They're winning some new clients, and then maybe that extends into the rest of the group. So I think every holding company is treating it a little bit differently depending on where they are holistically.
But ladies, before you jump in, so that also sounds very centralized and top-down, right? So is that the reality at the actual point of activity and action?
Yes, right. So I can comment that, but so FreeWheel Advertisers has a product that we launched this month called linear automation. So there's that word automation, and the idea was to remove the friction in the local TV buying process. Everybody knows television here, right? You have to estimate the ratings looking at books, and then you have to put together a schedule and plot the number of spots across the goals that you have. And the decision makers at holding companies and also larger agencies said, yes, I want to get rid of headcount. Is that what you'll hear from them? But then you talk to a TV buyer, and they say, well, there's an art to all of this, right? I'm the specialist for this market, so there are things that a computer cannot do. So
that's that negotiation thing that was alluded to earlier, right? It's more about
yeah. So I think it's really a hybrid. A lot of those buyers are the specialists in the market. Of course, they don't want to have to do a lot of manual stuff, but it's not getting rid of people. They would love to automate the ingestion of spot logs from all of the stations so that I can see how my campaigns are performing as soon as it starts running. That's what we're hearing.
And do you see the same or not?
I would say that it varies. To Jay's point, it really depends on the holding company. I mean, some of them are very top down, but some are bottom up, and the desire to move towards automation really is being driven by account teams, and in many instances, and I think that is probably also contributing to the lack of uniformity across the business that we see happening right now. And I think that until that changes, and I don't know when that will change, but I think that we're going to continue to see sort of this semi-hybrid model that we are all working within right now.
All right, so that all sounds sort of agency managing decline and streamlining operational, right? Which, not unimportant, right? Agencies arguably continue or will continue to have roles, plural, in sort of this process of getting media buys done. But maybe you can also skate into sort of more the marketer side of things, which I would imagine indirectly, yes, right? Reducing agency costs and the seemingly yearly process of rebidding for said work, right? And the scope of that work. But then also maybe the needs of what marketers want more directly, which we'll get into, like targeting and use of data and that kind of stuff. So is it any different, say, on the marketer side, either ones that you work with directly or that you hear more clearly, either with or without the agency involved?
I would, I can take that. I would say that we see with marketers that we work with directly today, we have a lot of direct brand relationships, and it tends to be that because they have their own individual mandate and their own sort of plan of attack, as well as their own data environment, they're able to move a little bit more nimbly in many cases. We work with a lot of really large brands that have just decided that they want to bring everything in-house and have that ultimate control. And for us, that's fine. I mean, we would supply the same exact services to them individually that we would supply to a holding company. I think that that there is that drive happening, and we're seeing a lot of our largest clients either sampling with different partners, across the advanced TV ecosystem, whether it's a measurement partner or what have you. But then they're also choosing to bring data in-house and to have that portability as well.
And to add to that, can you guys hear me? So we talk to agencies who represent their advertisers, so we know exactly what they're thinking, and they're coming to us, and they need to stay relevant. So from a marketer's point of view, we are actually called FreeWheel Advertisers for a reason, right? We're not called FreeWheel for agencies, even though our main clients are agencies. We really think about it in two ways, transforming the way media buying is working today so that we can help maximize the marketer ROI. So buy, get more, and then on the operation side of things with less. From a marketer's point of view, it's making sure that they're getting the value from whoever it is that they're working with, right? Whether that's the agency or directly with the platform that they're using. And part of that value is automation, in addition to the intelligence that they're bringing into their business to make smarter buying decisions.
Right, and that intelligence, though, it's also a euphemism probably for the word data, right? And more proprietary data by the marketer that has a more, evolved sense of maybe how they should be at least conceiving the use of media, let alone the ability to actually execute.
There's two main drivers that are pushing marketers to be a lot more engaged in licensing the software and then provisioning seats of that software to the agencies. One is that there's still a lot of fragmentation. A brand might have a TV agency and a digital agency, and then one brand has one agency that does everything. So you're the brand or the marketing sciences division, with a big CPG or a QSR, you may have 6 different agencies. So by working with a platform, and this is one of the fastest growing parts of our business, we can help them take all of the various disparate data sources that would typically come from different systems within agencies, unify that against a common ID that's tied to both television and digital, and then let them see how all the media is performing. And then they can push in their own sales data from their CRM system. They can push their customer data platform ID, match that to a platform ID that we have, that we match with LiveRamp. And now all of a sudden the marketer has a lot more power and insight than they ever thought. And it's not to say, oh, now I don't need my agency. It's now I can better manage my agency because I know which media across channels, across brands is driving what actual results. I mean, that is happening. We have sales data being pushed to us on a daily basis from a handful of brands, from mobile app sales data to location data to dealership data, and we're helping them understand within days, not months, how media is performing at the spot level on television or the impression level on OTT. That's new stuff for a marketer.
Okay, but the cynic would say, right, the journey from that font of, let's call it proprietary data and information from the marketer. We're talking about some of the granularities of that later this afternoon and a little bit tomorrow as well. The journey from that, and by the way, the storage and the processing at the client side, which is not always simplified and commonly done yet either, right? But assuming there is some semblance to that. The journey from that data to then, shall we call it the dumbing down process to get to what is the transactional currency, for better or for worse, Nielsen, right? The buyer in the middle and the seller in the middle of that process, using that as the currency, right? And then to backtrack and go back to showing performance based on those proprietary metrics, right? It seems like a very convoluted journey from data specificity to lowest common denomination back to the more specific issues and ROI expectations of the market.
It's downright nonsensical.
Well, okay, so I guess that's, so
Just say it.
in that mixture, right, is that, okay, so let's unpack that, right? Is that just the way it is, or it's maybe gonna get incrementally better as a few of those pieces along the way sort of get more connected, or is there something more transformative afoot?
I think it's served its purpose because no one's systems, whether it's one publisher to a TV programmer to an agency to a data system, have ever really been able to work together, right? That's totally different now. If buyers and sellers and the technology companies in between are all operating off of platforms that have figured out how to translate identity in a safe way and move targeting data, then you can now start to operate off of strategic currencies that matter to each advertiser by each campaign, right? And I think Fraser alluded to it earlier that, we do support traditional currency forecasting and measurement in our systems, but that's really almost as a set of training wheels so that people don't freak the fuck out, because that's what happens if they say, well, what do you mean I'm getting this many impressions on this? What's my Nielsen look like? They have no idea what you're talking about. So in order for them to feel comfortable, you need to say, well, this is what you did last year. If you take these new data sets, this is what you would get this year in Nielsen, but this is what you would get in terms of your on-target, lease expiring car owners over the next 2 quarters. And then once they see when you optimize to the last thing, and that actually increased or drove test drives or sales, then that primary thing that the training wheels become less important over time. And I think that's what, of course, we're pushing for, and I think a lot of marketers and other players in the room might want, but others don't. So the currency has a purpose, but how long can that really last?
If I can jump in, I would say.
No, you're not allowed.
I don't necessarily 100% agree with that position, because I do think that there's room for both. And, I think that as the ecosystem evolves, the role of Nielsen will change, and we're seeing that happen in real time right now, and that's obviously necessary. But I believe that, to Jay's earlier point, we're seeing advertisers working with both online and offline CRM data that is being onboarded and managed in a very privacy compliant manner within our safe haven, for example. And so we support those workflows, but at the same time, I don't see a world where there isn't room for a standardized currency and a side-by-side view. And in fact, when we talk to a lot of our buy-side larger agency platform holding companies, that's what they want right now. They want that parallel view because they need that, and the currency just doesn't go away overnight.
FreeWheel Advertisers is in a very, very unique and interesting position because we're part of a larger FreeWheel organization that also has a sell side and a data business unit. And Mark, I'm from Comcast because FreeWheel is owned by Comcast. I totally get
So she took it
your
personally.
story. So we're working on similar things like a device graph so that you can actually see how people are consuming video content. And then since we have visibility to that, there's a lot of initiatives happening within the FreeWheel organization, testing the data, right? Crawling and walking before we run and saying, hey, this is live. And then using that to say, now you can actually reach your strategic target as a marketer across these screens, because it doesn't matter, it's not just linear TV, right? It's just video. And then FreeWheel Advertisers has the platform for you to transact it, whether that's IO-based or an integration with a DSP that's executed. And as Jay said, we now have technology to get performance data as soon as that campaign runs. So I actually think there's a lot of stuff happening and things that are materializing to get us closer.
But the linchpin, though, it seems to be you're only strong as your weakest link. And I'm not saying media buyers are the weakest link, but I am saying they are a link where all of that desire by the marketer, all that proprietary data and that information and the costs and the procurement, all that stuff sort of literally, I think, certainly figuratively, all pushes across on the back of that person, right? Not even the media planner, not even the person who's the media director, the buyer, right? Which we said before, who elegantly said, is still a negotiated business, right? And if you're talking about television, or at least television-defined video, right? It feels to me that your currency probably needs to, it seems like a lot of pressure, right? To take all that stuff, put it through a filter, and then try to buy it on a currency that, frankly, is not even a good proxy for all of those things that the marketer is looking to achieve, the specificity. So, isn't that a problem?
You're totally right that the individual
First time today,
control,
sure.
right? I would say that's not even agency by agency, it's team by team within an agency. You might have a head of investment at this brand who totally understands the direction they're going because they're very in tune with what their clients are pushing them to do. But you may have another head of investment from a brand who's not being as progressive thinking, so they're going to look at a lot of this and say, you know what, we can slow play this. But to understand exactly how much extra efficiency you can get out of the people on your team so that they can intelligently negotiate. Because I think everyone agrees that when it comes to television, I think Lauren mentioned it because it's got scarcity to it, it's never going to be sort of this bidded auction marketplace of any sort. And you're not going to see, the NFL getting auctioned off through our TV, right? It's just not going to be there. But you can still do a lot of the work that was once swivel chair Excel from division to division between buyer and seller to taking data and having both sides have access to the same data. So moving away from asymmetrical advantage, right? Which is what the whole agency and TV network dynamic was built on, that has to change. And it's changing incrementally, where then they can both just say, all right, you want this for these 5 sub-brands of this automaker, I'm willing to give you these proposals for those needs. And you have systems that help automate the proposal process, right? Strata has one, VideoAmp has one, and they're linking now into trafficking systems and selling systems like Wide Orbit and Operative. So a lot of these pieces are enabling this to actually be all automated except for the actual buy button, right? And the buy button to be automated isn't technologically far away. It's because from a business perspective, it doesn't yet quite meet the needs for buyer and seller. So that process is there now. It's just how much does that scale in this year's upfronts moving from last year's upfronts? And we'll see here in 3 months.
Right, I think it's a legacy constraints question in many cases, and not actually because the capability isn't there. The capability is just about there. We see generally that with change, oftentimes it's driven by the marketers and the brands first, and then the agencies will sort of, and this isn't the case with all agencies obviously, but in many cases they will come to the table sort of at the behest of their client that really wants to start doing this, using granular data that's stored within our systems in these different workflows. So that's generally the path that we see take place.
All right, so let me 2 major questions as we sort of round third base here, coming into home for lunch eventually. The first one is, can you give the audience here a little insight into maybe some of the different verticals and maybe these commonalities and or the dissimilarities, right? Because auto has its own unique 3 tiers still. You've got retailers who are, shall we say, going through the grinder. The co-op marketing dollars may or may not be as much in play. You have traditional brand marketers who have historically used television like the CPGs, but also the onslaught of direct-to-consumer brands that, arguably have never, maybe didn't even use agencies in their earliest days, venture capital, backed, to kind of get to the brand associations they are now. So I guess the general question is, do you see any of these sort of different verticals either standing out for better or for worse relative to other ones right now, or is it one big pot of weirdness?
I mean, I think when you look at just the advanced TV ecosystem, auto has obviously always been a cornerstone for addressable household level one-to-one targeting, and that hasn't changed. I think we continue to see that being a core of our business as well, because we matched all the MVP.
So you're saying, so auto tends to have more of the data and more specificity needs?
Yeah, exactly, and we don't really see that changing. We do also see a lot of these direct-to-consumer brands that are first coming to TV, really what they do first is they oftentimes test out addressable TV, because the translation going from direct to consumer and using the web to going to household level one-to-one targeting is it's easy and natural. So we see that oftentimes as an entry point for that segment of the market. And with retail, we have a lot of retail partners that are really mining their own data in new and different ways and setting up their own in-house exchanges. And if you look at what Walmart's been doing, it's pretty remarkable what they're doing with that data, and whether they decide to actually become somewhat of a broker eventually with that data remains to be seen. But there's a lot of activity around the big cornerstone, legacy TV advertiser verticals right now in that area.
Are there any brands that are pushing you forward or targeting you from?
I'll start with CPG then, because that's the traditionally largest brand marketer, right? Them and telecom kind of flip between number one and number two. And because they're not a big buyer of addressable, right? Because everybody needs toothpaste and laundry detergent, so why buy one home versus the other? What they are doing though, and we've gotten pretty down in the marketing sciences on this, is to really quantify waste for them. So big brand marketers are willing to absorb some waste because that does help over time build your brand. But what level of waste is acceptable has now become possible to look at. And so we just did a 6-week experiment with a few big brands, really large CPG company, and said that, basically, if this was your on-target audience based on these other parameters that are either coming from their own CDP system or looking at things like MRI, then your GRPs might have been this, but you actually over-frequency by 90 on average when you look at it across screen, not just linear, but linear plus cross screen, and you were off target on 70% of your impressions. If you had re-optimized using data and using cross screen, so everything from traditional linear to addressable to OTT, you would have reduced your waste by X amount, saving you this many dollars in 6 weeks. And then it's up to them to decide how do I pocket that or do I reinvest it elsewhere? That is new kind of ground for a CPG company who's used to absorbing waste, but now they want to quantify that and then make their own decisions on how to reinvest it more smartly or just actually put it back into the company, because as we all know, CPG brands are not growing, right? They've been plateauing in most of their categories. So they are under big cost pressure to get smarter. And the whole ecosystem depends on CPG. So if they start to cut back or just invest more in Facebook and Google because it's more granularly trackable, then that's bad for all of us.
Which seems almost to be the inverse of, say, the direct-to-consumer brands, right? Which kind of look at it almost the opposite way. Like they want to finally hone or target an underrepresented group in CPG or whatever category, and then maybe broaden from there, right? You're talking about managing the current buy more efficiently or effectively, whereas the other one's actually looking at targeting and going out.
And that's like the opposite end of the spectrum for us. Like we recently started some outreach to those companies, right? We've identified like the top 350 and did a whole initiative, and our demand generation team had a 70% open rate on the direct-to-consumer campaign. I've never seen an email open rate like that ever, right? So they are very interested. And it's not just about, can I buy it addressably? They're like, if I bought this TV schedule, you guys have a TV footprint graph that can actually tie to a conversion pixel on my website. So it's not gonna give me every impression that was delivered on television resulted in this, but you might be able to give me 2 million. And that 2 million I can forecast out into representative of the whole country. That's what they do.
We're seeing a lot of push from political agencies, so they're actually really smart nowadays. Last couple of elections were crazy in terms of volume of spend, and they're using data heavily, and they're actually really getting into programmatic as well. We partnered with companies like Simplify that specializes in localized programmatic because they now have addresses in geofencing. So political agencies, I think, are one of those.
Right, and the idea of gerrymandering, literally and figuratively, around, say, a congressional district, right, which frankly may not be a DMA, or this is absolutely sub-DMA, or multiple DMAs.
Yeah,
right?
or groups of households, right?
Right, so one last question then as we slide into home for lunch. I'm just straining any baseball analogies going nowhere. So in some brief thoughts here, what are you, if you could sort of represent what you're hearing from the buy side most, would you say that they would like the sell side to be more intelligent about or smarter about or helpful in the process of advancing their buy strategy or getting to those relationships and deals more quickly, given data, given targeting, given all those sort of things that are going on? Is there any advice and or things that you're maybe helping facilitate to the to the sell side to make that process better and happier for everybody?
It's been a several year courting process between buyers and sellers, and oftentimes, if you think for yourself that we're just a software company, you guys figure it out, then we might still be 3 years from now talking about when it's going to get big. So we have taken that approach of trying to get buyers and sellers to meet in the middle and working with the seller side platforms, right? So we do have some pilots with the FreeWheel sell side for this year's upfronts around cross-screen forecasting, right? And one of our big agency clients that I referenced earlier, and one of the big networks, owned by your same parent company, have indeed agreed to a multi-year data-driven approach to cross-screening. Now, that's not the problem, but we now have to figure out in the middle there what data segments are going to be used by each side, what measurement is going to be used by each side, and both sides have agreed to share with each other what's working. So if these auto segments are working really well on this pocket of inventory, then the buyer will tell the seller that. And the seller is not going to say, I'm going to price gouge you now. It's about saying, I will sell you less impressions because it reduces waste, but I'm going to increase the cost for you moderately on the impressions that we know are on target. The buyer wins because they're getting far less waste. The seller wins because now they can get more yield optimization at an impression level. That's what's happening. It's slow, but there is sizable transactions inked for this year going into next. So that is a huge movement in the industry.
I would echo that. We're also hearing that there is more collaboration between the buy side and the sell side, and I think that that's really, really key and very important to the entire ecosystem evolving. I would just also say that I think one thing that advertisers and brands and agencies desperately want is standardization. So standardization of the data sets being used, if it's third-party data, the standardization of workflows, and that's one thing that we can help support also with making everything able to be tied to that one universal ID, for targeting and measurement, and that's actually the core of our partnership with VideoAmp that enables them to do a lot of the analytics work that they do within their platform. So, I think that there are still some pain points there, but I think that there's a lot of progress being made. And frankly, somebody said something on one of the last panels around TV not necessarily needing as much data as digital, and I definitely agree with that. I think that TV, whether it's addressable or linear plus connected across the board, doesn't need 100 different granular long-tail digital data sets to become more data enabled. It needs a core set to work with, and I think that both sides have come to a better alignment on what that data is now, and we're seeing that in our business.
I think digital needs that much data either. I think a lot of that was designed so that you buy fraud with a smile on your face, right?
So I'll speak specifically about OTT because we're focusing on that a lot, and what I've heard from buyers personally, because we've talked to a lot of them, is when I buy OTT right now, it's like looking at a can of soup and I look at the ingredients and all of the ingredients look exactly the same. So as a seller, they want to be able to see exactly what value you're offering, because they don't want to just have to decide based on price. That doesn't make any of us win, right? So transparency on exactly what I'm getting while I'm buying it, so that when I get their performance report, I'm not surprised that I ran in a place that I'm not supposed to be running in as a brand.
Well, so I think hopefully this has been enlightening. I thank all of you. I'm sorry that we didn't have any other sort of agency representation here and/or brand marketer representation, but I think it's pretty clear that these folks are plugged into sort of the dynamics there. And there's make no mistake. I heard sort of the word collaboration. I can't imagine it not moving more towards that, because marketers and/or the media companies, frankly, don't have a lot of time to waste or money to waste without this process sort of getting better and more enhanced. So a bunch of things we talked about here are further on the docket later this afternoon. So first of all, say thank you, please, for all our panelists.